to self-therapeutic project, and I used to do an intro, but I'm not gonna do that anymore. In this recording, I just want to kind of get something on my chest here, and it's actually supposed to be something that I guess I feel good about and fairly happy with, but it's like I'm trying to like almost retrieve it, because it's almost like enough time has passed that I just don't think about it anymore. But I remember, when I was I guess this is like almost 2.5, maybe 3 years now, since the whole ordeal, and finding just how awful society had really become. And one of the things that I had, and this is, marked on the title, if you can't tell, it's about no longer having to, now there's a caveat, obviously, right? But no longer having to demonstrate that who you are as a person. You don't have to prove that you're not some, fake virtue signaling bastard trying to use those like weird, progressive, disturbing left-wing policy type culture to get ahead in your career or advance yourself, advance some kind of weird political agenda. Like, you don't have to do that when there have been so many like judgmental pricks who have literally ousted any person who has been using those kind of social justice warrior victim mentality, diversity, inclusion, DEI, equality, and LGBTQIA plus the 27 letters of the alphabet. Like, and there were a lot of very unpleasant politics at play in the 2010s, where people were using all sorts of oversensitive political activism to prop up their moral ego and use that as a social power, a social variant of power. Power comes in different forms. It's not just wealth or money, nor is it just appearance or status. Part of it is there's also the social reputation type, and what these people did, it was like the communal narcissist or the grandiose narcissist going about claiming how great of a person they are, using virtue signaling and progressive politics and race and sex and all that kind of activism to kind of prop themselves up to be something that is admirable. And people got really fed up with that, obviously, and rightfully so. And that's when the counterculture to that counterculture emerged. And the counterculture to that was, obviously, instead of victim mentality, it was victim blaming, which is not any better. But of course, we had this before in the 90s, right? And it's just like a back and forth, ebb and flow. And of course, I guess you would say the opposite to these like social justice warriors, it would be like the political rednecks who, have the stereotypical kind of person who, actively engages in open, true forms of racism and sexism, versus those who would cry wolf and cry racist, and cry sexism when they have not really been subjected to that at all, or it was just a minor perceived slight, and then they overreact. And so both sides are truly off. When the counterculture to that, obviously, is just overt bullying and harassment and ridicule, pure abuse, okay? Malice, sadism, and they have their own form of, again, communal narcissism and grandiose narcissism as well, and antisocial behavior and sociopathy and sadism. Because on this end, this counterculture that really try to beat back against that, I guess, this quote unquote the left. I don't even have a right term for this because it's such a catchphrase. It's a wrong phrase to use, but it catches a variety of very different types of very obscene behavior and political agenda and activist movements, and puts it onto one group, even though they don't hold exactly too much similarity with each other. And then you could say the same thing about this particular catch term, which is like the far right or the alt-right, but that doesn't really exist. This is why, I agree that these terms really shouldn't be used, because they're so inflammatory and they don't carry much meaning to them, because it's just a catch-all term for a variety of different things. But you get the general idea, you get the gist of what I'm trying to say here, right? And that's all that needs to be communicated. Obviously, I'm not using these terms literally. I'm using them as in the sense that it communicates to you from me the kind of subject matter that we're speaking about, and that's all that's important. I'm using it in terms of communication, okay? And so there's the counterculture in the 2020s was just to be, everything's funny, everything, all jokes, and everywhere you go, even in the public, even at work, even on, even insults, defamation, slander at the expense of others, right? Basically pure types of harassment and bullying were the kind of like the antidote. I guess you say it's not much of a cure, but it was what was done in order to push back very aggressively against the 2010s of like snowflake type. I'm using a lot of buzzwords here because these are the terms that were used, and just so that I can paint the picture appropriately and you understand the context in which I'm providing this kind of discussion. Okay, so it's just these two really, or multiple, I should say, just divided into two large groups of many multiple different radical extreme niches and groups of, well, extremism at its core, whether it's political or cultural or class divisions, so on and so forth. And if you can't tell, I hate it. I think it's sickening. It's just such a, part of it is, you can't avoid politics because it's just so ingrained into how you run and govern a city or a country or a state or a province, right? Of course, you have no choice but to be almost, directly influenced by some of these policies and activities and governing legislation and day-to-day life. What do you experience on the streets when you go to work, when you go to a commute, where your kids grow up, where your loved ones and your husband or your spouse or your wife, this directly, yes, has some kind of impact on you. But when I first entered, one of the things that I felt was really nice is that, that was like 2021 to 2022. This is like just a little bit, like maybe 2 years after the pandemic began officially, is that seeing the backlash and recognizing that, the counterculture was that people were being openly encouraged, and they were all kind of on board with the notion that everyone was oversensitive, but they didn't understand what exactly the cure or the right approach or strategy or solution, what the solution was to the problem. But they were on board with certain things being at least part of the solution, which was to start making jokes, to start, giving criticism, to start saying no, right? Basically embracing that you can have the shadow self, or, you can have boundaries and just tell people things that they don't want to hear, or and on top of that also making light and ridiculing things in general, so that you can't take things too seriously. And that's right, you shouldn't be all panicky and anxious and you're taking things too seriously. depending on the context, of course, I should say, right? But there was certainly in the 2010s, people were taking things way too seriously. You couldn't say a single thing. Like the most trivial thing would be turned and blown out proportion into some kind of, oh, you're racist and sexist and all this kind of shit, you're misogynistic, right? But well, I would argue that now, over the past 5 years, it's been like the opposite, where people would blow out proportion anything that was kind. So you decide to help a stranger on the street because they, I don't know, tripped on something, or a disabled person was just, trying to get on the ramp inside the bus and you just moved out the way. People would be like, oh, look at this guy, he thinks he's so nice, he's such a pushover, he's such a doormat, what a stamp. You'd have that opposite extreme from people who are like openly embracing being an authentic dickhead. They're just being assholes, right? And it's kind of like, because they're so sick, and some of them, there's so many different types of people doing this for different reasons. Some of them are doing it obviously because they're fed up with the bullshit, all the oversensitive politics and nonsense that happened in 2010s. But at other times, of course, there are other people who are just doing it because that's who they actually are, and they're allowed to express their, general, troublesome, disruptive, narcissistic, abusive, harassing, psychopathic behaviors and tendencies now, because it's become more socially acceptable. So that's another subgroup, and another subgroup might be just doing it because they're bandwagoning, right? There are people here who just are weak of character. They just join whatever is, sensationalist and running, and they just board on with it because, it's easy to go with the flow and reap the benefits of it, because then you get accepted by the majority of the population. So a lot of that is like in-group, out-group bias and conformity. It's like mob mentality and peer pressure, which again, nothing new. Happened in the 90s, happened in the 60s, happened in like the 1700s Victorian era, happened all the way since the beginning of time in, dynasty era China, happened in all the way back when, we were fucking Neanderthals over 11,000 years ago. This is just human behavior, okay? And so there were multiple subgroups of people who were doing things like that. And what I want to elucidate and speak about, because this is nice for me, is, if you can't tell by the title, right, I no longer have to, one of the things that I was really happy with, and you could say that I'm almost giving some sense of like credit, and I am, in fact, partly grateful. Things have gone way too far on this end, of course, right? In the counterculture, things have become even more just as ridiculous. But, to their credence, to their benefit, I want to say that, I've benefited from this. It's a net positive, really, right? And I'm not justifying it. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to be what's the word they use that I hate? The word they use, the enabling, I'm not going to enable, but I hate using that fucking word because it's just, it's gross. Okay, listen, right? I've just like when the pandemic rolled on by in 2020, and, given how my entire life, and I've talked a little bit about what my kind of general life has been. I've never been allowed to be like a child, right? I've always had to take like a very just an adult-oriented approach to life, right? From the very beginning, because it's always been responsibility and working ahead of the curve, because you can't afford to let your guard down in this kind of world. Especially if you know what it's like growing up in a third world country, or you have family members or blood, family but not the same, relatives who have grown up, and you have seen the damage, the chaos, the destruction, the poverty, the starvation, the war-torn, illnesses, the everlasting consequences, the family drama, all the, neglect, or abuse, or the drunken stupor, or the gambling problems, gambling, drinking, drugs, addiction, all that kind of crap. You see all this stuff and you experience this from a very early age. and they're, broken families, single mother, single father kind of stuff, orphans, and this stuff, there's not really any chance for you to ignore it. And if you willfully ignore it and engage in behaviors that are destructive, like I said, drinking or gambling or prostitution or sex trafficking or whatever, or suicide or self-harm, you would just end up hurting yourself, right? Or hurting the people who love you. And obviously I couldn't afford to take that approach, because there was someone who I had to care for, or at least set some sort of role model for, and he's a lot younger than I am. And so I had to I felt there was a responsibility for that, but obviously I owed myself some responsibility. And at that time I was so brainwashed that I even felt I owed responsibility to my abusers. So there's some codependency in that. But regardless, right, that just meant taking on a lot of responsibilities. And so I benefited from, actually 25 years later, when I would grow up, right, I was very well prepared for crisis management, for the pandemic, for warfare, for poverty, for social, chaos and hysteria, for the public mass pandemonium, craziness, people being lunatics, for corruption in the politics, all these 8 factors. I was already well aware of corruption and human behavior and mob mentality and peer pressure and bullying and poverty and, all sorts of things like that. This is nothing new for me. Maybe for some kids, it's when they're, I don't think there's a lot of kids who really grow up this wealthy and this much, but maybe it's changed now, because I realized that, especially recently, I've seen that, I guess I was wrong in my perception. There's a lot of people who've grown up who don't really understand the full extent of what reality's like. And they even go around blaming society and blaming their parents or blaming other people for not telling them how cruel this world really is. I've seen these ridiculous posts on, with millions of likes or engagement comments saying, people never teach us how awful the world really is. They just kind of let us find out on our own. And then they're kind of crying and bitching in Mandarin. Not all of them are. Some of them are just speaking about it reasonably, and it's a reasonable frustration. But some of them are really complaining about this, they're cussing out the world for not telling them sooner when they were trust fund babies, and scroll on Instagram 24/7 and pay attention to their beautiful makeup, and they spend all their time on making their hair look nice, and then they go on marketing gigs and then wonder why they're not prepared for the world and stuff like that. Just really spoiled brats, period. And obviously, I probably really shouldn't be laughing at that, but it's only because a lot of them have really decided to treat me really poorly. I would do this. So I'm not going to pull any punches here anymore, right? Because it's been insane, the amount of vitriol that has been directed towards people who have been prepared for life, and from people who were totally unprepared. And, it's just so antithetical. It just makes no sense whatsoever. So one of the things that was beneficial for me, right, was that knowing how cruel life is, and how tragic it can be, and how much suffering there really is, I was able to prepare well in advance. And when the pandemic came over and swept over the world, right, I still had a job, and I wasn't the only one. There were a lot of people who also knew what they had to do. I had a degree in something that was actually worthwhile. I didn't take a degree in fucking gender studies or some stupid nonsense some political liberal arts degree trying to promote some kind of activism, right? I took a degree that was something useful, right? It was in healthcare, it was in medicine, it was something that was science oriented or engineering, or something that was core to the infrastructure that is necessary for supporting a functional society, right? Skilled trades, carpenting, plumbing, medicine, healthcare, economics, something like that. And not only was my education in that background, obviously my entire time was spent networking. Since halfway into 2010s, I went out there volunteering as much as I could, basically somewhat internships, but they're not really internships, and going out there and meeting new people and seeing different experiences, and working for different companies and just broadening my horizons and getting to know as many people as possible, understanding many different perspectives, learning more and more about life, right? And what people go through, how to understand and empathize with other people from different communities, different countries, different upbringings and backgrounds, so that I myself as well can eventually contribute properly to society in a way that offers value. Therefore, when shit hits the fan, when the war comes, when poverty comes, when an epidemic comes, I will have something to offer society to help others, and in turn also be able to lift myself up so that no one has to come and save my ass because I've taken responsibility for myself, right? So one of the benefits then recently is that obviously not only did I benefit and have a job, an essential job. I was working for a first aid company at the time, but it could have been somewhere else. I just happened to choose that one because it's one of the things that fell in line, and at the time I thought was good. But it wasn't the only, it's not like it was a perfect company. Like I said, I left it because there was some really not great things happening in a certain specific department. But there were other people, I got along with a lot of colleagues there, and I really liked a lot of people there. And as long as outside the department, even within the same department, there are a lot of people I go along with. It's just certain people in power really like to use their power to put other people down with paper pushing. If you work in the office, right? It's the red tape, political, power struggles, the paper pushing, bureaucracy, blame shifting bullshit, all that crap, right? And that was happening, and it was a specific small group of individuals. And again, for privacy, confidentiality, and because I don't like to engage in petty stuff, I generally am not going to list any names or anything like that, right? Just the situation was such, okay? And I spoke to, briefly about this kind of stuff already in the past. But I benefited from the pandemic. I was able to actually board the bus, and it was empty every day. I still worked 5-6 days a week. In fact, because we manufactured survival kits and first aid kits and masks and gloves in addition, because these were supplies that pretty much the public was starving for, because everyone was on a pandemonium about, like infection, COVID. I just kept working, and going on public was easy. It was like empty buses, empty trains, empty streets. It was quiet, it was peaceful, and I was able to make an income. I was still able to see my colleagues. I didn't value all my colleagues' interactions, because in every company, even my current company, there are colleagues who are not so great. Some of them are really petty. Some of them are very passive aggressive, and some of them like to play power struggles and like to try to put other people down. But for the most part, right, I had a lot of great colleagues back then, and I still do now. And even better now, where I'm working right now, right? And I'm really grateful for that. I'm really grateful to spend time with some really great people who I get to work with and see on a day-to-day basis or every other day. And so it was good for my social life, for my general health and well-being, my physical health, my mental health, physical, because I get to go out every single day. Even though it's a pandemic, I have an obligation. I have a sense of responsibility. I have something to do, and not just in terms of income. But so that's one thing that was very beneficial, right? But I've also benefited recently from my capacity to work ahead of the curve, and this is regarding once I kind of realized how awful things had become from a societal standpoint, and the way people were behaving publicly everywhere. One thing that I found to be, as horrible as it was, right? Once again, it was a huge net positive, for whatever, harassment. I've talked a lot about the craziness and the lunacy and the ridiculous bullshit that happens in the public all the time, day in, day out. But no matter how much, I speak, obviously it's negative stuff, so it's going to sound negative because it is negative. It's intrinsically negative stuff. There's no way to talk about it without acknowledging that it's just bad, it's just destructive. But that doesn't mean that I haven't, overall it's been a net positive. and it's a big net positive. I have absolutely zero regrets. One of the biggest things that I want to talk to on is the title of this recording, this media file or asset or podcast is in this episode. I'm talking about specifically how I benefited from the counterculture backlash to the previous counterculture. So the previous counterculture was being oversensitive bastard, which crybaby, cry over everything, victim mentality. And then this current counterculture recently, the past 5 years since the 2020s, has been effectively victim blaming, basically harassing people left, right, and center and trying to go back to the ridiculous bullshit that happened in the 90s and just bring it all back. And, restoring some sense of common sense and then losing themselves again as the pendulum swings from far left to far right, to all various extremes. Things never stay stable for very long. They always venture into some weird veering path of lunacy, and people kind of lose themselves along the movements and can't find a sense of balance or good middle ground. That is such a common theme, and I benefited from this recent counterculture. And what have I benefited from? So the benefit here is that I don't really have to prove myself. Because during the 2010s, and especially the latter half, what I found was, people got really skeptical, right? There's a transition period between these victim mentality, retards, and then the victim blaming retards. So there are a lot of people who became really endorsing and embracing the whole judgmental culture. Oh, red flag this, everything's a red flag. You have a Velcro wallet, you're a red flag. It's ridiculous, right? It's just as bad. Being judgmental all the time is just as bad as saying that you never judge ever, right? They're both extremes. They're both kind of dumb, right? And they're both very, very just generally naive, not very wise, because you need to be able to discern. Having good judgment means knowing when you need to be cautious and also knowing when you can sort of just relax and chill out, okay? And people really lost the past 15 years, the past 2 decades, that has been a skill that's been missing, or it's more than a skill, it's just general, human decency or common sense. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's a lot of different things put together. It's like an umbrella catch-all term, right? Common sense doesn't exist per se. It's a variety of different skill sets and experiences and practices, and even some theory comes into that. So I would say that how I've benefited is that, and I have absolutely nothing but, it's weird saying that. Once again, I'm not trying to enable this, but the whole enabling thing, but I'm not trying to excuse it. But people have treated me really poorly, thinking that, they're really judgmental pricks, the fucking assholes who go around thinking that if you're being nice, it's just because you're trying to fake it and virtue signal. And to a degree, I understand where they're coming from, because again, a lot of these are the Gen Zs who are kind of edgy and trying to be, this dark villain phase, trying to be all awful, being openly sadistic and mocking random people on the street. I saw comments where there are thousands and thousands of people liking it and, bandwagoning on the fact that, oh, we agree, we can, pretty much our generation in Gen Z, we all agree that we can be mean to people as long as they make us uncomfortable. It's so stupid, right? It's no, you can't be awful and mean to people just because they make you uncomfortable. Because if you're uncomfortable, that's your own emotion. That's you. Just either you are oversensitive to something, and apparently in this case, you're oversensitive to appearances, or oversensitive to someone else just being within your vicinity. But that's not their problem. That's you. You feel uncomfortable. That's your fucking problem. Deal with it. Grow the fuck up. God damn, right? That's something that any other generation, millennials included, Gen X, Gen Z, Gen X, boomers, silent generation, we all know this is our own emotion. It's not anyone else's fault. Otherwise, you're just morally decrepit. You're just a fucking asshole, right? There's nothing good about that. You can't just be mean to someone because they make you uncomfortable, because the discomfort comes from you. It's your own lack. You have an issue with someone else, but that's your own issue. That's not their issue. That's you projecting, okay? So obviously that should be obvious, but it's not obvious anymore enough. And they have, as sad as it is to say, but it's true, this has benefited me. And oh god, like it's and I know I'm not the only one who's benefited from this, because the way to look at this, right, from it's not just a stoicism perspective or a meditative perspective or just a general wise perspective. You can use whatever analogy you want to use. The way that this has really helped me, and I think this is helpful to a degree. Once again, not to provide any excuses or alibis for their horrible behavior, because if they're treating you like shit, they are shit. Okay, it's for sure, they're jackasses. But let's be clear on one thing. If you manage to stay true to your nature and you've persisted and persevered in endorsing, it's like whenever time so I see someone who needs help, I'll go help them, right? And some people will do it because they're virtue signaling and they're trying to make craft a nice image out in the public, right? There are fake people like that. That was the 2010s. We had a lot of that bullshit going around. Fake people trying to be nice to reap this social benefit or some crap like that. Like, fuck them, because they gave all the people who had a genuine heart, who did good things because that's just who they are, right? Because they care. I care. I don't know what to tell you. That's just who I am. That's just who they are too. But then you had all these fake people who were jumping on the bandwagon of virtue signaling and trying to help people for ulterior motives to look good for their own reputation so they get ahead and get these HR positions in diversity, inclusion, equality, all that bullshit, right? Yeah, so that's why, like, especially the younger generations are so like fed up with it, that they have this own counterculture of, abusive behavior. Is because they're so fed up with all the fakeness and the fake virtue signaling. But the problem is, it's just because these fake assholes, right? These pretentious pricks back then who were pretending to be morally saints, which they weren't, were just trying to capitalize on that behavior and painting a bad name. They were giving a bad image to all the people, including the people who were genuinely caring. So I really feel for the people who actually had a good heart, people who actually were just doing good things because they just like to help other people, and they exist. And there maybe aren't, it's not a large proportion of society that's like this. I know it's a minority now for sure, and it's a small minority at that. Most people are very self-serving, and not all of them. That doesn't mean that they're evil. It doesn't mean they're evil. There's self-serving, right? And then there are some of the self-serving population that is really truly like sadistic and corrupt. But then there's also, a large proportion of that self-serving population, which is just kind of going with the flow. They're just being selfish. It's not nothing crazy, right? It's just like, yeah, dog eat dog world, that kind of happens. And, they're not being vile about it. They're just kind of doing what is, beneficial or necessary. And then there's that other proportion where there are people who are generally just selfless. And then you can subdivide that, proportion into smaller subproportions as well. People who are just being selfless because they think that that's what's going to reap them the most benefits in a trusting society. So they'll cooperate because cooperating in a society that's cooperative generally is beneficial for them and their loved ones. But then you have, a smaller proportion of that proportion, which is probably cutting it down to maybe like 20% of the entire populace, right? There might be 15% this, 30% that, 28% that, and then like a smaller populace. I'm just throwing numbers out here. I don't know the exact quantifications. The numbers, the numerical values would change, obviously, through time, as politics and culture and society changes through time. So when it comes to these people who have genuine, I don't want to use the word altruism because that's a bit far. Let's be honest, that's too pure. It's almost like there are people with altruism for sure, but it's almost like it'd be the opposite of psychopathy, right? It's like psychopathy and altruism are kind of like idealistic terms. They're kind of extreme, right? They're kind of universal absolutes. So I won't say altruistic, but let's just say that these people really care, and they're generally benevolent, and they're genuinely good-hearted people. I would say that, yeah, while they have been subjected, and I guess I'm not sort of speaking personally here, which kind of sucks in that sense. But yeah, so people like that probably were harassed. Let's just be clear. Yeah, a lot of these people who probably genuinely care about other people and like to go out of their way to let the homeless guy on the bus, right? Not the homeless guy, like the guy who's like, got who's on a what do you call it, crutch, got hit by a car accident. He's on one leg limping, and he's got a crutch, and they helping him, or they allow they help the pregnant lady with this baby stroller up the staircase or whatever. People like that, probably you've been pushed around and harassed and bullied and to no end, and it's totally unfair. It's it's not right at all, for sure. But my perspective on that, of course, from a slightly adaptive and just kind of how tragic and cruel the world is, right? So what's the right perspective to look at this, or not the right, but there's no right way to look at this, but what is a way that's beneficial that I've always seen throughout life is that chiming against the how I don't like victim mentality. I think a lot of people have actually bullied me because of that. They felt that I was not being empathic or compassionate, so they decided to be awful to me, which shows how much lack of empathy they have, obviously. The fact is, it's benefited people like us who genuinely just care about other people. We have benefit from this. Oh yes, we have. And that's because we don't have to prove ourselves anymore. Before, in the 2010s, I was so disgusted by the amount of people who will go out there and pretend to be some moral saint and preach themselves to be this, diversity, inclusions, and they would do all these like quotas in the hiring department and try to, lock up the highways with picket signs and, disrupt the general civilian life of regular everyday people trying to get work done. These people, they're going about the movements all the wrong ways because they don't actually care about the movement itself or about the people who are suffering. So if you're someone who is, being racially profiled for real, and someone else who is trying to fake being racially profiled and then fake support you so that they could get ahead in their careers or get ahead in terms of like social standing, so that everyone would look at them like a saint, right? Those kinds of people who try to take advantage of that whole victim mentality, diversity, inclusion, political agenda to they try to hijack the movement, right? At the expense of those who were suffering, because they would take all the most militant, aggressive approaches. They would take, they would be disruptive to the public. They would, they would ruin the commuting spree for people trying to just get to work. They would be loud and obnoxious and, derail things and try to get into power influences in the government, and form large political parties and try to take over. And then all their policies would fail, and all their, but they were all kind of delusional. And part of it was also, not only were they delusional, they just wanted the power. They were insecure, they wanted the power. And a lot of them were just flat out not very good people. Some of them were egocentric, so they were narcissists. Some of them were just psychopathic and found a way to, manipulate the system or manipulate the social masses to get ahead. So those were like sociopaths. And others were just born like that, and they were just cold and calculated and wanted power. So they were Machiavellian, or they were psychopathic. And there's a good, mishmash of all these things. And some of them aren't even full-blown disorders. They're just people who are just not that great, but they don't have to be extreme like the ones I just listed there. They're just not great people. They took advantage of that. The benefit, of course, that I'm alluding to is that during this entire time, I found it was just very easy to just be me. I'll say it again. It was very easy to just be me. And this is something, because for them, it's a challenge, right? They have to fake it. And when I say they fake it, they have to put effort into pretending to be a good person. Because they're pretending. They're not actually like that. And for us, that's just who we are. It's just us naturally. It's I don't have to try to care about someone. I just care. So, you know what I mean? So it's like, so if there's anything that's like, if you want to look at this, for all the probably the cruelty, or for my boys and girls, or for the men and women out there, for the families out there who actually are just genuinely kind and loving and caring, and you just like to see other people, it's heartwarming. You're genuinely you have the positive side of humanity, because humanity can be awful and horrific and cruel. And humanity can also be full of miracles, and not miracles, but it can be caring, it can be warm, it can be heartwarming. I guess recently then you must have been treated really poorly, and you might have felt that you wanted to hide that away. I'll tell you from my experience that obviously it wasn't easy going about every day constantly being laughed at and ridiculed, because I would openly try to help the guy on the street, or try openly help the this mother who just like got a baby stroller, or just generally I'll just open the door for someone, like just the basic act of decency. It's nothing crazy. I'm not trying to prove a point or anything, although there was a point. I was trying to prove a point because people were being so fucking awful that I just want to give them the middle finger. You know what? You want to be awful? I'll be kind. And I just did that just to tell them to fuck off, right? Because people were just so awful that you just kind of fight that with kindness. Just like, okay, you want to be a dick? I'll just do kind and nice things to piss you off because you don't like to see niceness. Imagine getting offended that someone's being decent. Imagine getting offended that someone's saying hi. Imagine getting offended that somebody asked you a question and you answered the question directly without any snide remarks or giggling or like insults. Like there were literally like so many youth who came up to me, asked me a question, I gave them direct answer, and then they would say that I'm weird and burst out giggling and saying, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? I'm like, it's not me who's the issue. You are the joke. You're the issue, not me. You asked a question, so I gave you an answer. I wasn't nice about it. I wasn't mean about it. I just gave you an answer. And then you saw something that wasn't there, and you created a problem out of nothing, right? So the fact is, one of the best things about just being who we are is that we don't have to fake it. I have never had to prove myself to be I have to prove myself consistently without having to provide any sort of, I don't have to like fabricate anything. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't have to create an image, right? And that's why it's so easy for us. I mean, it might be a struggle when you're being harassed all the time to maintain that integrity, for sure. I'm not doubting that, obviously, but to who you are, hearts of heart, for who you are inside, right? If you're the kind of person who genuinely cares about other people, what they've done for you is a huge service. It's not a disservice, it's a service, because of how judgmental and awful these people have been in society, constantly harassing people who are nice or trying to be nice. What they've effectively done is they have weeded out all the fake, pretentious, manipulative, and masquerading idiots who were trying to play the game of virtue signaling, the people who are trying to take advantage of the 2010s movement of being a nice person to get ahead in life. The people who were faking their way in their character. They've essentially, all these horrible people who are just genuinely abusive and assaulting and harassing, have basically made all the people of weak character who were just bandwagoning, pretending to be nice, pretending to be a good person, pretending to be a moral saint. They've been ruled out because they had to pretend and fake their way into success. As a result, they don't actually have any real character to stand on the moment you apply any little bit of pressure, which that pressure was applied from one counterculture, from one group to the other, right? The group of people who are harassing and abusive and bullies, they bullied these people who were pretending to be nice, who were fake nice people. They were not really nice. They were not really good people at all. They were just playing nice to get ahead. They got exposed, they got ratted out, and then they instantly, some of them just caved in, and others just switch sides. They ended up switching to their side, and immediately their mask fell off and they showed their true colors, and they decided to join in with the next movement, and they switched from being virtue signaling to vice signaling. Let me quote it right here. Vice signaling. So virtue, vice. If you don't know, just like Google vice. Okay? Basically being awful. They switch sides from pretending to be a nice person to being a fucking jackass. And that's because what is acceptable now is to be awful. So they're going to be awful because it's going to benefit them. That's right. And so what does that do for people who are genuinely caring? We don't have to try. And what they've done is they've effectively shown the whole world, that, for us, the only thing that's left is, we are the ones remaining, right? We're the last ones standing, okay? Because we're true to ourselves. So I don't know, it's not much solace, I know, that telling you that, essentially the people who are pretending to be you, who are trying to take advantage of the system, who are trying to get ahead of you, get ahead of other people, just by pretending to be what you are and basically monopolizing your character to get ahead. They've been exposed now, and some of them have just ousted themselves and said, okay, it's not helping us anymore, so let's just do the next thing, and they moved on. The great thing about it is now you don't have to prove yourself anymore. There's no longer this group of masquerading fake nice people anymore. People have seen over the past 5 years or so who you really are. I don't have to prove myself for who I am anymore. I don't have to distinguish myself from these fake ass motherfuckers who out there trying to make themselves look, we're, anti-racist, we're anti-sexist, all that kind of bullshit. I don't have to distinguish myself from them anymore. I just genuinely am someone who cares about other people. And that's all there is to it. And that's the biggest benefit that I've had, is that I don't need to go around having people question me or my integrity. Sure, there are people who hate me because they don't like that I care. Sure, there are people who are just awful, who don't like good people, and therefore they discriminate against me and treat me poorly. But the fact is, I would never have gotten along with those people in the first place. So there's no loss there, because we never would have gotten along. They would have hated me, and honestly, I hate them too. I don't like shitty people. Facts. That's all there is to it. So nothing's changed on that front, okay? We've never liked each other to begin with. It's just out in the open now. And all the people who are faking themselves, their true colors have shown. They've exposed themselves. They switch sides, right? Just to benefit themselves. So as far as I'm concerned, right, coming from, just being a man, or being, someone with character, or you could be a woman, you know what I mean. I don't mean man as in the sense of you can only be a man to be a person of character. You could be trans and you can still be a person of character, right? It's not about the exterior. It's not about the skin. It's not about what's between your legs. It's not about your height advantages, or your skin color, or your amount of wealth. It's about who you are as a person. Okay? Who you are as a person. And I found that the biggest thing, the most welcoming thing for me, is that I can just be myself, and I don't have to, because, through the trials and tribulations, even though I've been dealt with 1,000 different iterations of slander and insult and bullying for just being myself, right? For just going out there and wanting to help someone because I want to help someone. Right? And because, it's more than that. It's not pure altruism, like I said. It's because I believe this is a sustainability standpoint. If you're wise enough or intelligent enough to see the long-term consequences of certain societal behaviors, you'll know that it's not good for society in general for us to constantly degrade and denigrate and hate on each other. It's not good, because ultimately that's going to destabilize and cause all this unnecessary conflict that will escalate to a point where it's going to eventually lead to some kind of revolution or civil war and stuff like that. We don't want to get to that point, because it's already happened so many times in history, and it's never been good, because war is always a lose-lose situation. There are no winners in war. None. Especially with my, heritage, and I know what that's like, right? Personal. I've mentioned before, like part Vietnamese. I'm not going to talk too much about that, and the consequences of war and what it does to like families and people and society, right? It's not good, right? So yeah, there's that part. Okay, there is that part where it's like, it's just not good for society, and you have the common sense and wisdom and the street smarts and the long-term, knowledge and theory, understanding and practice to understand it's not good. But part of that is also because I just don't like to see people getting hurt. I don't know what to tell you. If you're someone who likes to watch other people get hurt and suffer, then you're sick and twisted. Fuck you. Okay. And for those of us who aren't like that, we're just being. If anything, some of you might have to hide your good nature because you were constantly being harassed for being kind. And so if you're constantly being harassed for being a good person, then you have no incentive to continue being a good person, do you? And so you probably tried to hide it. And that's actually really sad, I think. That's really sad. And I'm sorry that you've had to do that. Because I know that there were times where I was tempted to do the same. And I'm not going to blame people for not persevering through that, because the pressure is insane, right? Some of these things people are literally trying to sabotage and ruin your life because some of them can't possibly fathom you actually just being a genuinely good human being. They're so cynical and so, some of them are just so shallow themselves that they just don't think, they project their own incapacity. They're lacking in that department. They don't know what it's like to actually feel for other people, except for other people who don't know how to feel. In other words, they're psychopaths who are basically grouping with other psychopaths and saying, see, we don't care about people. You don't care either, right? Nope, I don't care either. So then they just stay together in this cohort of bullies because they can relate only with people who bully. They can only relate with people who are sick and sadistic. They can't relate with people who actually care. They find that weird. Well, of course, we find them weird, right? So I wouldn't blame you if you decide to stop, helping the random person on the street. No, because it was really horrible, right? People were horrible. I'm not just talking about the psychopaths. Obviously, that's a minority. The majority of people aren't psychopaths. They're just bandwagoners, that's all, right? They're just self-interested. It's not a majority of people are personality disorders. No, that's only like 10%. That's like 1 in 10. So what's the other half? What's the majority? The 40% population? They're bandwagoners. They just join on board. They just do what is going to help them, and they don't have much resistance to that. They're just going to do what's like helpful for them, even if it comes at the expense of others. So I'm sorry that if maybe if you I'm not blaming you for stopping, because there was a lot of pressure, right? But to that end, there was a lot of benefit. Because I don't have to prove myself anymore, and neither do you. Because they've seen time and time again that no matter how awful people are, you still care about others. And you don't have to prove yourself because you just are that way. You're not pretending, you're not faking it. And I found that is that's like 100 times. That is one of the biggest benefits. That is one of the most promising things that I've received from just being proactive or prepared, is that having worked on, my character, and some of you have done that. So, some of you are like stoics, right? Some of you are stoics. Some of you are meditative. Some of you are Buddhists. Some of you are Hindus, or some of you are like, just very devout Christians. Some of you are just like very strong humanists. It doesn't matter which denomination you use, what religion or spirituality or lack thereof. You could be atheist and still be a really great person. But for those of you out there who have stuck true to who you are, the greatest thing that you could have received from all this, from from this horrible counterculture of bullying, harassment, aggression, malice, narcissism, vanity, psychopathy, sociopathy, is that you no longer have to distinguish yourself. You no longer have to prove that you're one of those fakers, one of those two-faced, backstabbing, pretentious, lying-ass motherfuckers who try to use that left-wing political movement to virtue signal and pretend that there's someone good to get ahead in life, to get power in politics, or in careers, or in anything, or in social reputation. You don't have to prove that anymore because that's just who you are, and you stood your ground for the past 3, 4, 5 years. And people can see that. Or at least if you've been resilient, like I said, I guess I've earned a reputation around my local district for just being me. So, I don't know if this message will ever reach the right person, right? If there's even one person who just genuinely cares and you receive this message. Well, I know that there are actually a few of you who actually listen now. Like, I can see my subscribers. There's some of you who are just genuinely, you're a genuine human being who just genuinely cares. And I hope you know that you can see things from a positive standpoint, and this is the positive standpoint. This is the benefit, this is the plus, right? It's a big plus, is that you've just been true to your character, true to your nature this entire time. And people will know. Because you didn't have to prove yourself. Even in the whole tidal wave assault, you still stood your ground. Because what else could you do? You were just being yourself. I'm just being me. But all the fakers, all the schemers, the Dark Knight, right? All these people who were, pretending, right, to be good just so they could get ahead in the 2010s, 2010 to 2019, right? So much of that crazy politics, right? They've been weeded out. Some of them, again, have just shown their true colors, that they were just trying to get ahead, which only leaves you, right? And now you don't have to prove yourself anymore because real recognize real. You're a real one. And that's where I'm going to leave it. So, chin up. And for what it's worth, obviously, I like people like you. And I hope you stay that way to whatever degree that you can. Don't self-sabotage, right? Don't get yourself in trouble, but you're the kind of person we need in society. And I hope you know that you're valued, and I like people like you. And I think you should know that.